sort of the final stage of the of respiration, or using glucose to create energy for the cell, is the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain is a series of molecules located within the mitochondrial inner membrane. So mitochondria actually has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So it's an organelle with it is membrane bound, and it has another membrane inside of it. There are two membranes within this mitochondria. So remember NADH and FADH2, those things that we sort of use to strip electrons, to strip energy away from the energetic bonds within glucose. So what's happening in electron transport is those are getting oxidized by the molecules within the electron transport chain. And if you remember oil rig from a few lectures ago, oxidation is loss. Okay, oxidation is loss of electrons. So NADH, FADH2 are getting their electrons taken away and becoming NAD plus and FAD plus again. The passengers are getting out of the taxi at the electron transport chain. Those electrons are getting dropped off. So each carrier in the chain is reduced by electrons from the carrier that came before it. So what's happening is NADH, well, we won't think about FADH2. We're just going to think about NADH right now, but FADH2 is here too. It's bringing those electrons that it got from the glucose molecule, in most cases, or from the Krebs cycle, which is just sort of a later derivative of glycolysis. But it's getting electrons that it got ultimately from a glucose molecule, and it's bringing it to the electron transport chain. Then it's dropping it off at the electron transport chain. Okay. Then those electrons are being passed downhill through these different ETC, electron transport chain molecules. ETC means electron transport chain, by the way. The last electron acceptor in the electron transport chain is oxygen. This is why you need to breathe in oxygen, by the way. So this whole process is why you are exhaling CO2, because as we saw previously, many of the products of cellular respiration, or many of the steps in cellular respiration, create that CO2, and you need oxygen here to serve as your terminal or your final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain. We're going to talk about the details of this, so if you're confused right now, it's understandable, don't worry. So by moving electrons through the electron transport chain, you are building up a whole bunch of charge on one side of the membrane inside the mitochondria. Okay, so it says movement of electrons through the ETC releases energy to power the movement of hydrogen ions through the three ETC protein complexes. You're building up a gradient. You're building up charge on the two different sides of the gradient using those charged electrons. So the movement of these electrons down their concentration and charge gradients back into the inner compartment through an enzyme called ATP synthase drives the creation of ATP from ADP and phosphate. And we'll talk about this in more detail in a second here. In the inner compartment, oxygen is accepting those final electrons and creating water. So again, this is the reason you have to breathe in oxygen to get those electrons at the very end, and this is the reason that you breathe out CO2. So here you have, here's a mitochondria, right? So outside of this would be the cytosol, right? It's just inside the cell. And then you have this outer layer, and then you have this inner layer, okay? So this is showing you within the mitochondria, you have the inner compartment, sort of in the very center in here, and you have the outer compartment. And you can see, here is the path of this electron. This electron is negatively charged, and so what it's going to do is it's going to cause positively charged protons to follow it, to be pumped out from the inner to the outer compartment of the cell. Okay, this is going to create a whole bunch of positive charges in this outer membrane. So if you have a whole bunch of positive charges together, what are they going to want to do? They're going to be high concentration. They're going to want to diffuse because of charge and because of concentration from the inner membrane. It flopped it on us. Sorry about that. It's going to want to. They're going to want to be pushed into the mitochondria. They're going to want to go away from this region of high concentration. And the way they do this is through this protein called ATP synthase. ATP synthase uses the energy of these positively charged particles moving through it to create ATP. So the whole point, well, not the whole point, but one of the big points of breaking down this glucose molecule was so that you could get these electrons in here so that they could cause positively charged particles to be forced out into this region of high concentration. Right, so here's your electron transport chain. Hydrogen molecules are able to pass through them. And then once you have all these hydrogens in a region of high concentration, they're going to want to do what they do, which is diffuse because of concentration and because of electrical charge. And as they diffuse through this protein creates ATP. It utilizes the energy of those positively charged molecules, particles, I should say, to create ATP. So, and I should mention here, those hydrogens, or I'm sorry, those electrons are going to be accepted by oxygen, and they're going to ultimately form water. If you don't have any oxygen there, this entire thing shuts down. It cannot continue. You cannot continue just building up pyruvate, stuff like that. It doesn't work. And so if you don't have oxygen, you're stuck. All right. Which is why if you want to have like a quick burst of energy, you need to just undergo glycolysis, because you can briefly just use that for energy for a short period of time. Okay, because you can't really get enough oxygen and just quick energy. Anyway, the next thing we're going to talk about is sort of biochemistry very, very briefly, but this is going to be other respiratory pathways and other foods that you can eat, aside from just like glucose, or how do you make foods into glucose so that you can make energy from them.